I still remember that sunny afternoon like it was yesterday. The golden light was pouring through my kitchen window, painting my little world with warmth. I was sitting at the table, my old flip phone lying next to my cup of chamomile tea, the same phone I'd had for nearly 15 years. I didn't think much about it. That little phone had seen birthdays, weddings, and even the day my husband passed. To me, it wasn't just plastic and buttons, it was a memory keeper. But my grandson, Ethan, didn't see it that way. "Grandma," he said, picking up the phone with 2 fingers like it was some kind of relic. "This thing belongs in a museum. It doesn't even have a touchscreen." I chuckled softly, stirring my tea. "It does what I need it to do, sweetheart. Calls, messages, and a little flashlight. What more could I ask for?" He rolled his eyes dramatically. "You can't even FaceTime me on this, or send memes. Grandma, it's ancient." His mother, my daughter Claire, tried not to laugh, though I could tell she was amused too. But Ethan was relentless. "Seriously, Grandma, I'll buy you a new phone someday. You need something modern, something smart." I looked at him with a smile that came from years of patience. "I already have something smart," I said, tapping my temple, "and it's still working just fine." He laughed loud and carefree, the way only a 15-year-old can, confident that he knows more than the rest of the world. I didn't take it to heart. Children today are raised on screens and instant everything. They forget that simplicity once ruled the world. Still, a little part of me felt invisible, like everything about my way of life, handwritten letters, paper books, family dinners without phones, was just a silly relic to them. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun go down behind the oak trees. Ethan was inside, glued to his shiny new phone, headphones in, scrolling endlessly. I whispered to myself, "One day, sweetheart, you'll understand that old doesn't mean useless." Little did I know, that day was coming much sooner than either of us could imagine.
A few days after Ethan teased me about my flip phone, I found myself smiling every time I looked at it, not because it was special in any fancy way, but because it reminded me of how different the world used to be. Slower, quieter, and maybe a little kinder. When I was his age, the sound of a ringing phone meant excitement. You'd run to the hallway hoping it was a friend calling. Now, phones buzz all day long, and half the time people don't even answer. They text instead. I can still remember the feeling of turning that little dial, waiting for each click. Patience was a part of life then. Ethan, though, lived in another universe. He couldn't sit still for 5 minutes without checking his screen. Every morning before school, he'd slump at the table with one hand on his cereal bowl and the other scrolling. I'd try to chat, ask about his classes or his basketball team, but he'd just nod absently. One morning I said, "Ethan, you'll get square eyes if you stare at that thing any longer." He laughed. "Don't worry, Grandma. My eyes have the latest software update." That boy always had a comeback. Still, I loved having him around. Claire worked long hours at the hospital, so Ethan often stayed with me after school. I'd make him sandwiches and he'd raid my cookie jar. Sometimes he helped me in the garden, though mostly he preferred the Wi-Fi inside. I never nagged him too much. Kids learn in their own time. But sometimes, when I'd see him sitting in silence, eyes locked on that glowing screen, I'd whisper a small prayer that he'd find balance in his world of noise. That week, our town had been buzzing about a coming storm. The local news warned of heavy rain, strong winds, maybe even flooding. I wasn't worried. I'd lived through worse. Still, I charged my old phone, filled a few jugs of water, and made sure my little flashlight still worked. Years of experience had taught me that being prepared never hurt anyone. When Ethan came over that Friday, he was soaked in teenage boredom.
Mom's on double shift again, he sighed, dropping his backpack. Guess it's just us, Grandma. Lucky me, I said, grinning. I could use some company. He smiled back half-heartedly. You got Wi-Fi, right? Of course, I said, but I also have cookies, hot chocolate, and a deck of cards. He smirked. Cards? What is this, 1940? I gasped dramatically. You wound me, young man. That earned me a laugh, small but real. We spent that evening baking cookies, the rain starting to tap gently on the windows. For the first time in a while, Ethan put his phone down long enough to help me mix the dough. Grandma, he said, licking chocolate from his thumb, I think you could go viral with these cookies. Viral? Oh no, I already had my flu shot, I said with a straight face. He laughed so hard he almost dropped the tray. You're hopeless! Hopelessly wise, I corrected. It felt good, simple, and warm. Moments like that reminded me why I loved being a grandmother. I didn't need to be trendy or tech-savvy, I just needed to be present. Later that night, the wind began to howl louder. The power flickered, then steadied again. Ethan didn't notice. He was on his phone, probably messaging friends. I looked at him, his face lit by that cold blue glow, and I thought about how fragile all that technology really was. One lightning strike, and it could vanish into darkness. I went around the house, double-checking the candles and the batteries in my little radio. When Ethan saw me, he laughed again. Grandma, seriously, who even uses candles anymore? I do, I said, lighting one for practice. They never need charging. He shook his head, smiling. You're something else. I looked at him with love and said softly, You'll see one day, Ethan. Sometimes old things know how to survive better than new ones. The storm outside groaned, distant thunder rolling through the sky. I could feel it in my bones, the way older folks can sense weather changes. A heavy stillness settled over the neighborhood. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Before bed, I set my phone on the nightstand. Its tiny green light blinked patiently, fully charged and waiting. Ethan stayed up late in the guest room, probably watching videos, the faint sound of laughter drifting through the hallway. I whispered a little prayer before closing my eyes. Keep us safe tonight, Lord. Because deep down, I had a feeling the storm wasn't done with us yet.
The rain started before sunrise. I woke to the sound of it drumming against the roof. Soft at first, then harder, heavier, like 1,000 small fists beating on the windows. The air smelled of wet earth and electricity. When I peeked through the curtains, the sky was a swirling gray blanket, thick and low, pressing down on our little town. Ethan was still asleep, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. I smiled, shook my head, and went to make breakfast. By the time the pancakes were done, thunder had rolled in like an angry drumbeat. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The house fell silent. No humming refrigerator, no ticking clock, just the steady roar of the storm outside. "Grandma?" Ethan called, his voice groggy and confused. "Wi-Fi's gone." I couldn't help but chuckle. "The power's gone, sweetheart. That means everything's off, even your precious Wi-Fi." He stumbled into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes wide. "What? How long will it be out?" he asked. I shrugged, flipping a pancake. "Could be hours, maybe longer. We'll make do." He groaned, slumping into a chair. "Ugh, this is so lame. I can't even text anyone." "Maybe that's a blessing," I teased. "You might have to talk to your old grandma for once." He smirked but didn't reply. Instead, he pulled out his phone, glaring at the no signal sign on the screen. "See? No service either. What am I supposed to do now?" "Eat," I said, placing a stack of pancakes before him, "and help me keep the candles ready." By midday, the storm grew worse. Rain pounded the windows and the wind howled through the trees, bending branches like dancers caught in a wild rhythm. I'd lived through storms before, but something about this one felt different, fiercer, hungrier. Ethan tried to distract himself by playing a game on his phone, but after a while, even that drained his battery. When it finally died, he sighed dramatically, as if the world had ended. "Guess you'll have to survive without it," I said gently. He rolled his eyes. "You don't get it, Grandma. Everything I do is on my phone." "I know. That's exactly why you should learn how to do things without it sometimes." He didn't answer. Instead, he went to the window, watching the storm rage outside. "Whoa, the street's already flooding," he murmured. I walked over and saw it too. The water rising fast, gushing down the road like a small river. The gutters overflowed, carrying leaves, twigs, and bits of trash along. I felt a tightness in my chest. "Ethan, stay away from the windows, love. Storms like this can turn ugly real fast." We moved to the living room, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind scream and the thunder roll like cannon fire. Every so often, the house creaked as if it were breathing with us. The rain was icy cold as we stepped outside, soaking us instantly. The water on the street was rushing fast, swirling around our ankles. I held the flashlight high, its narrow beam cutting through the dark. The car was stuck halfway down the block, half submerged, with Mrs. Miller pounding on the window, her voice faint through the storm. My heart pounded as I tried to move faster, but every step was a struggle. The current tugged at my legs, and my old bones weren't as strong as they used to be. Ethan was ahead of me, splashing through the water, calling, "Mrs. Miller, hold on, we're coming!" His voice cracked with fear and determination. I shouted for him to be careful, but the wind snatched my words away. When we reached the car, the water was already halfway up the doors. Mrs. Miller's face was pale behind the glass. Ethan tried pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's jammed," he yelled. The current was growing stronger by the minute. I could feel the danger in the air. "Ethan, step back," I cried, but he wouldn't listen. He kept tugging, his sneakers slipping on the pavement. I looked around desperately. No other lights, no other people. The whole neighborhood seemed swallowed by the storm. I knew we couldn't do this alone. We needed help, fast. That's when I remembered my phone, my old stubborn flip phone that everyone laughed at. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out of my pocket, praying it hadn't gotten wet. The little screen flickered to life, glowing weakly in the darkness. I flipped it open and pressed the emergency button. To my relief, there were still 2 bars of signal. I could hardly believe it. While the fancy smartphones were useless, that little relic still connected to the world. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice came through, clearer than I expected. "This is Mary Whitaker. There's a woman trapped in her car on Maple Street. The water's rising fast. Please send help immediately." I could barely hear myself over the storm, but the operator stayed steady. "Stay where you are, ma'am. Rescue is on the way. Keep everyone safe and visible if you can." "We'll try," I said. "Please hurry." I hung up and looked at Ethan, who was still pushing at the car door. "Help's coming, Ethan. They're on their way." But the rain was relentless, and the water kept climbing. Mrs. Miller's car lights dimmed, flickered, and then went out completely. Ethan banged on the window with his fist, shouting, "Hold on, Mrs. Miller." I could see the panic rising in his eyes. "Ethan, back up," I called again. The next thing I knew, his foot slipped, and he fell hard into the rushing water.
"Ethan!" I screamed, my heart leaping into my throat. He disappeared beneath the surface for a terrifying second, and then his head broke through again, coughing, his arms flailing as the current pulled him away from the car. Without thinking, I dropped the flashlight and waded toward him. The cold cut through me like knives, but I didn't care. My only thought was to reach my grandson. "Ethan, grab my hand!" I shouted. He struggled, his fingers just out of reach. My legs ached, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I kept pushing through the water. Finally, his hand found mine, and I gripped it with everything I had left. We stumbled together toward a parked truck that hadn't been moved yet. I clung to the door handle, holding Ethan tight as the water tried to drag us both down. He was shaking, his face pale and frightened. "Grandma," he said weakly, I thought I was gonna—" "Don't you say it," I interrupted, pulling him closer. "You're all right, you hear me? You're all right." Through the rain, I saw the flashing lights then, red and white beams cutting through the dark, reflecting off the water like tiny stars. The sound of sirens was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. The rescue team had arrived. 2 firefighters waded toward us with ropes and bright jackets, shouting instructions. "Stay put, ma'am. We've got you." I nodded, clutching Ethan's shoulder. They reached Mrs. Miller's car first, breaking the window and pulling her out. She was coughing, but alive. Then they turned to us, securing ropes around our waists and guiding us back toward solid ground. When we finally stepped out of the water, I could barely feel my legs. One of the rescuers wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and led us to the back of the ambulance. Ethan sat beside me, drenched and shivering. He looked at my little flip phone in disbelief, its screen still glowing faintly in my trembling hand. "You called them with that?" he asked softly. I nodded, smiling through my exhaustion. "I told you it still works." He let out a shaky laugh, half disbelieving, half amazed. "Grandma, you just saved Mrs. Miller. And me." I looked at him tenderly. His face, usually full of teenage pride, now carried something different. Humility, understanding, gratitude. He took my hand and squeezed it, his wet hair sticking to his forehead. "I'm sorry I laughed at your phone," he said quietly. "It's not just a phone anymore. It's like a superhero." I laughed weakly, the sound trembling in my chest. "No, sweetheart. It's just an old phone, but it still knows how to do what matters." The rain began to ease, turning from a downpour to a drizzle. The firefighters moved around us, checking equipment, helping neighbors, making sure everyone was safe. I sat there, holding Ethan's hand and staring at that little phone. It had scratches, a cracked hinge, and a battery that didn't last long anymore. But it had done something that all the modern gadgets couldn't. It had worked when we needed it most. Later that night, when we returned home, the power was still out. The house smelled of damp air and candle wax. Ethan helped me change into dry clothes and make some tea on the gas stove. We sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in blankets, listening to the rain taper off outside. For a long time, we didn't speak. There was just a quiet understanding between us. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You know, Grandma, maybe old things aren't so bad after all." I smiled at him, my heart full. Old things have stories, Ethan. They remember where they've been. That's what makes them strong. He nodded slowly, staring at the flickering candlelight. I could see it in his eyes. The boy who once mocked me was growing into someone wiser, someone who understood that not everything new is better. Outside, the first stars began to peek through the clouds. The storm had passed, but it had left behind something beautiful. Not destruction, but clarity. I looked at my old flip phone resting on the table, its little green light still glowing faithfully. "You did good, old friend," I whispered, patting it gently. Ethan laughed softly beside me. For the first time in years, the silence between us felt warm, comfortable, and full of love.
The next morning, the air felt washed clean, as if the world had taken a deep breath after the storm. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, falling across the wooden table where my old flip phone still rested beside a mug of cold tea. I looked at it and smiled. Its little green light blinked slowly, patiently, as if it knew what it had done. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The power had finally come back during the night. Ethan was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not the quiet kind that comes from solitude, but the kind that fills you up when you know your family is safe. As I sat there, sipping a fresh cup of tea, the memories of last night played in my mind like an old film reel. The rain, the fear, the flashing lights, Ethan's hand gripping mine. It all felt unreal, and yet the ache in my body reminded me it had truly happened. My old bones protested when I stood up, but I didn't mind. Every twinge felt like a reminder that I was still here, that we both were. I moved to the window, watching the morning light dance over the puddles in the street. Neighbors were already outside, cleaning up debris, waving to one another, sharing stories of what they'd been through. Even Mrs. Miller was out there, bundled in a coat, leaning on her cane, but smiling. When she saw me at the window, she lifted her hand and mouthed, "Thank you." My heart warmed instantly. Ethan woke up not long after, his hair messy and eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning, Grandma," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. I smiled. "Morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" He stretched his arms and groaned a little. "Sore, but alive, thanks to you." His words were simple, but they carried weight. He looked at the phone on the table and grinned sheepishly. "I can't believe that thing worked when mine didn't." I chuckled, stirring my tea. "Old things may be slow, Ethan, but they're built to last. Sometimes that's what makes all the difference." He came over and sat across from me, picking up the phone carefully, almost reverentially. He said, "You know, I used to think all old stuff was useless, like people holding on to things just because they're afraid to move on. But last night, I realized something." He paused, looking at me with those earnest brown eyes that reminded me so much of his mother when she was young. "You didn't hold on to it because you were scared of new things. You kept it because you trusted it, because it worked for you." I smiled softly. "Exactly. Not everything needs replacing just because something shinier comes along. Sometimes the best things are the ones that have already proven their worth."
He nodded, then added with a small laugh, "Guess I learned that the hard way." His phone, still sitting dead on the counter, seemed to agree. We both laughed quietly, the sound light and genuine. It had been a long time since laughter came that easily between us. Later that afternoon, the local news crew came by to interview some of the neighbors about the storm. They stopped in front of our house, asking about the rescue. I was shy at first. Cameras always made me nervous, but Ethan nudged me gently. "Come on, Grandma, you deserve the credit." So I stepped outside, holding my cup of tea, and told them the story. The reporter was astonished when I held up the little flip phone. "You called emergency services with that?" she asked, laughing in disbelief. "That's right," I said proudly. "Sometimes old things have a little magic left in them." That evening, the story aired on the local station. The headline made me chuckle. "Grandmother's old phone saves lives in a storm." People from the neighborhood dropped by to thank me, bringing flowers, cookies, and stories of how they too had underestimated the old ways. Even Ethan's friends texted him after seeing the broadcast, joking that his grandma was a legend. He rolled his eyes, pretending to be embarrassed, but I could see the pride in his smile. "They think you're cool now, Grandma," he said. I laughed. About time someone did. A few days later, I found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, carefully cleaning my old phone with a soft cloth. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just giving your hero a little polish," he said, with a grin. "I don't want it to stop working when it's clearly got superpowers." I laughed so hard I almost spilled my tea. It felt so good to laugh with him, to share something that wasn't a disagreement or a lecture. We had crossed an invisible bridge, one built out of fear, love, and a stubborn little piece of plastic that refused to die. Over the following weeks, something changed in Ethan. He started coming home earlier, sitting with me during dinner, asking about my day. He even helped me with the garden one morning, though he complained about the worms, of course. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset while he listened to my stories, not out of politeness this time, but genuine interest. I could see him growing, not just taller or older, but wiser. The distance that once lived between us had faded, replaced by something gentler: respect. One night, as we sat outside, he handed me a small box wrapped in shiny paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Just open it," he said, smiling. I peeled the paper away to find a new phone, a simple model, not one of those fancy ones with 10 cameras. It still had buttons, a little screen, and even flipped open. It's kind of old-fashioned, but I figured maybe it's something we can both use. I looked at him, touched beyond words. "You didn't have to do this," I whispered. "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted to, because now I understand. Sometimes the old things are worth keeping, and sometimes it's okay to blend the old with the new." I hugged him then, tightly, my heart swelling with love and pride. The world had changed so much since I was young. Faster phones, smarter devices, endless noise. But moments like that reminded me that the things that matter most never change: love, courage, and family. As I sat in my rocking chair that night, my old phone and the new one side by side on the table, I thought about how strange life can be. The very thing that once made my grandson laugh became the reason we were still here, together, stronger than before. I smiled to myself and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for second chances, for simple things, and for the lessons we sometimes learn the hard way. The next morning, Ethan left for school with a wave and a grin. Before he walked out the door, he paused and said, "Love you, Grandma." I froze for a second, surprised. It had been so long since I had heard those words from him. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, my voice catching just a little. When the door closed behind him, I looked at my phone again and smiled. It wasn't just an old device anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that even when the world moves too fast, some things are still built to last. And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across the kitchen floor, I thought to myself, sometimes it takes a storm to remind us what truly connects us.